Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Budget Finance Committee special meeting for Thursday, June 22nd, 2023. To order, please, do I hear motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Mr. Lebo has informed me that he's going to be in the site. There's some transit issues in terms of his getting here on time. So thank you for letting us know. So tonight we have a very simple meeting. And by the way, thank you everybody for your patience about shifting this meeting over. Last week was a very busy week. And as you may know, a number of members of the staff were on vacation. So Director Vaughn and I suggested that it was a good idea for us to just postpone it a little bit so that everybody could be here in person and save us a little bit of extra catch-up time. With that, I can hand it over to Director Vaughn for the director's report.
And our
There it is.
there's that little bit of time that I was hoping for to throw it up on the screen for everybody, in addition to if you have it, there's extra copies. So just walking through her recommendation from an actual council member, we did make some changes. I will just take a minute to note on the top portion of that, some of the language has changed up there, indicating green and yellow, what it means. In addition to, if you would scroll down just a little bit to the capital, that we added a legend down below, first right there. Yep. Scroll on. As requested. We did attempt to, and we'll still work on trying to get an additional legend up top for the operating department. But it didn't turn out like we hoped. And so we had to, because of the amount of time, we had to just remove it and change the language. So then if we can go back to the top to the operating, thank you. And just walk down. So walking down to the first yellow one, which is our watching items, the Civil Service Commission, that one just doesn't quite follow the operating. It actually is good that it's a little over, because that means we're attempting to try to hire some police officers, which is what that is tied to. So that is tied to hiring. And so that will not quite follow a steady operating.
Is that because I interviewed them?
Yes, the whole process is the Civil Service Commission. And that's what, and so that's not going to be it's going to follow a need to hiring for specifically that department. There isn't a Civil Service Commission for any other department besides police.
And just a quick reminder to everyone that there are two state mandated commissions. One is the Planning Commission, and one is the Civil Service Commission. We're required to have those under states.
So going down to detention and jail, this is one that has now been up for about a year. So and that increase is due to some changes that we were allowed to house people, inmates. I'm like, I'm not sure exactly what's called it. Thank you. Over in Yakima, and now we have lost that ability to house them long term on the east side of the mountains, and so the cost over here for housing has gone up and is significantly higher. And so that's one we're definitely watching. I just want to put it on your radar that the likelihood that we will be looking at that for a mid-buy budget amendment is probably pretty high, since we're already almost at 37%. And it has been a trend now for a year. So I just want to just put that out there right now. Walking down to the environmental services, that one again is mostly tied to, it actually is tied to the tree accounts, which most of that is grant, and so they were finishing up a grant that the city has been paid for, and so these are the expenditures that are associated and tied with that grant. Then walking down to finance and IT, that one is not one to be concerned about. It's just, it literally is just a hair over, but you are over that threshold and it will trigger to the yellow color. So walking down to municipal services is actually a really lean budget. And what's driving that still is insurance. So that's an annual cost. So yeah, but that department really runs very lean. And then walking down to the surface water utility, that one is a carryover for 2022 invoices that we're probably going to, because it's a significant amount, we may have to look at that for amending, but it was 2022's cost that didn't make it in to be paid within the open period of the 20 days. And I think that's just going to continue to cause a little bit of an issue. So amending, because that what did have a previous allocation, but once that December 31st date hits, and if we don't pay it in the open period, then it becomes your new budget's expense period. So until we amend it, that one's going to continue. We're going to continue to have that conversation on a monthly basis. So if we can, would you like to stop and see if anybody has questions?
Yeah, I actually had a comment. I just wanted to mention to council that I was reviewing invoices earlier this week, and our legal expenses are pretty high. And I would just request of my colleagues to be cognizant of that. And that if you have a legal question or a question that potentially not need to be added, but asked of our legal team, run around the horn a little bit with staff. Graciously, they help out in that in a lot of ways. So pretty substantive legal bill, and we have a lot of things going on. So I just want to make sure we're cognizant of that. Mr. Rotani, please.
So that's not reflected in the.
Not in this one. No,
Okay.
no, that'll be next one.
So yeah, this is a May 31st cutoff. And actually there's a couple things that I did a double take on this because I knew we had paid them, but they're in the actual June. So actually that is, well, if we can scroll down, I'll hold that comment until we walk over to revenue, but just. Oh,
I'm sorry, just any other questions before we go?
sorry, I just
Farther.
continued.
You're fine.
Got so
That's
excited.
okay. That's good.
We get excited. Just more of a comment than a question I need to answer right now, but I know we typically do the mid-biennium, budget adjustments. Has there been any discussion, as we've seen a few of these be a little bit more volatile, maybe doing like a half-yearly budget adjustment in the future, or where would you recommend we start considering something like that so that we align our tracking a little bit more realistically to what we're seeing?
Yes, we could do budget amendments and or adjustment. You could interchange those two words. At any time, I've just everything's just been extremely busy in our department, if I'm going to be extremely honest. And so we could do a budget amendment and true this up now, or we can wait and have a bigger discussion and have more of a conversation around everything holistically, and then do one adjustment for the year. And it's not right or wrong, or it's just different ways of doing.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've talked about, it's a great question, Councilor Riddle. We've talked about trying to, if it's not super urgent or controversial, try to consolidate them out of consideration of staff time, because bringing the budget adjustment to us on a budget adjustments to us on a regular basis is it's not a small task. And so bringing them together and putting them into one big medium-sized adjustment sometimes makes a lot of sense. However, the option is always there for the administration to say, hey, listen, we need something urgent, and we need to figure out a way to pivot here and get your blessing, so to speak, as a group.
Yeah, I think it's some of the stuff like the surface water utility and that just happening in outside of the 20 days. It's kind of nice to know that we know that number's not a challenge, but it looks like it is. And some of these adjustments I think are easier than our like mid-biennium discussion where we're looking at sort of more meaty decisions. So it's almost, to me, there's sort of two different approaches and I'm not advocating right now for one way or the other, but it's kind of nice to get those cleanup items that are not controversial and that just need to happen. And then if there's any more deeper discussions around financial needs in the biennium, mid-biennium discussions, where we would have those, unless there's an urgent, timely issue that you would bring to us. So just something to think about. Maybe there's two different lists that are different efforts.
Yeah, we can.
Also the same effort that maybe it's not useful.
I would say that the mid-biennial budget adjustment, we end up having multiple conversations around, well, which a budget amendment. We have multiple conversations around, but a budget amendment might go a little bit quicker than a mid-biennial budget adjustment. Because we tend to have more of a holistic conversation about why things are trending. So I think it's, again, not, it's just a preference, and I can add it to the list of things to probably bring forward in July.
I wouldn't want us to do it just for the sake of doing it, but it seems like we do have some things on this dashboard which could really benefit from reflecting more of what you're seeing on your end that we don't get to see here.
Right.
Please continue, and unless there are any other questions, let's check our time here. Oops.
So then walking down to the non-operating departments, and I will point out that I have moved a couple down. So this item is actually going to look a little bigger than it has in the past. So I keep saying the ARPA fiscal recovery doesn't follow the operating. If it doesn't quite follow the operating, then we really should put it under the non-operating departments. So catching up on some of this stuff, moving it to more appropriately where it should be reflected on the dashboard. So the ARPA fiscal recovery, this one is the local 104 contract that has been approved, and we are seeing those expenditures coming in finally. Oh,
Just saw your text, John.
Very John Lennon, John.
You're sorry?
Very John Lennon.
Somebody's gonna look on.
You know it's setting up.
Well, questions on non-operating departments.
Just the community programs and those are things like our pick in the park and things that we're out there doing that. Okay.
so community programs is our community programs, exactly like you were just saying, and our partners. That's all within that line item, yes. And I do notice that we start to see those later in the there's a little bit of catch up because I think they are also very limited on staff. So and then walking,
I did see Tracy's hand.
I'm sorry, Tracy.
Mr. President,
I think I'm just being kind of dense and I appreciate your explanation. Can you explain why the move from the operating departments to non-operating again?
So the only ones I moved were the ARPA fiscal recovery. And then I also moved the lakefront property, which is really, we should probably call that that's the strategic opportunity fund, but that was solely focused as the lakefront property. So that's what we called it on this dashboard. So I only moved a couple of the, excuse me, there was one more, police technology. So there was 3 that I moved. The lakefront property, the ARPA, and the police technology, because they don't follow an actual operating it's similar to a department where it's going to have ongoing expenses. So I moved them down to the non-operating in order to more accurately reflect that. Because every single time when they go yellow, I keep saying to everybody how they're not tracked, it's not one to be concerned about. So those are the ones that I elected to move down. Police technology, those are one-time costs. So when we're purchasing, so it's gonna, right now it's really low, but then all of a sudden it might go up to 60% because we made a purchase. Where that's not gonna follow an ongoing expense, it's really more of a one-time.
Like the radios that just thought.
Yeah.
So Lindsay, you might want to explain for our newer council members the strategic opportunity fund. I think that we've discussed it before, but I'm not sure if it's still on their radar,
So the Strategic Opportunity Fund was created prior to the budget, right before I became the director. And I will probably lean possibly on City Administrator Hill just a little bit, because my understanding, and he can add some additional detail, is it was a fund that was created that the city would put in some revenue to that fund in order to secure dollars for opportunities that would come up for the city. Because when those opportunities would come up in the past, we were always struggling to find where we were gonna, grab the money from in order to get a grant match or have some additional funds.
And one of the keys that is that administration cannot spend a dime until we brought that strategic opportunity to council about
Oh, yeah.
that expenditure. And so when the lakefront property came, that was the fund that we leaned on to secure that quicker.
Thanks.
Great point.
It's a good point for us to keep in mind for the future too. So as we think about budget adjustments and so forth.
And we may need to, as probably part of the mid-buy, I'll leave it for the mid-buy, but I probably change the fund is named the Strategic Opportunity Fund. For more transparency sake, on the dashboard, we call it we were calling it the lakefront property, to try to be more transparent on what the fund was actually paying for. So the fund is labeled in that manner, but I'll wait until probably the mid-buy to, if we have agreed to that adjustment, that we'll make a change on here.
You can put it back to strategic opportunity.
Call it what it truly is. Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's why I wanted just to describe it, because I think going forward, we want to retain the strategic opportunity. That's all.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So then walking down to, I will just capture elections, emergency management, and actually mostly memberships. Those are more one-time. So elections and emergency management, those are pretty set costs for a year, one-time costs, and an annual invoice. And emergency management is our NEMCO. Then memberships you pay for the most part on an annual basis. And so I think we only have a handful, maybe two, that have not been paid for this year because of the timing of when they come in. Not because they have not been paid, but so, and that's the memberships. So that's not gonna follow, they're one time for the most part. Is it okay to walk over to?
Colleagues, questions on non-operating departments, starting with Councilmember Brittle, us and Mr. Lebo.
A brief question of, do you know what's in our strategic opportunity fund right now? We spent most of it. What's the what is our balance on that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I definitely can.
Sure, I just can't remember where we're at, unfortunately. I think I'd like to know where we're at.
I don't think that the fund has a very large fund balance. I can tell you that off the top of my head. I can tell you that off the top of my head, but I can't quote the exact dollar amount.
Vice Chair Cassidy.
Yes, and just a follow-up to that, could you remind us too, when you do tell us what's in it now, whether we made a decision during the last budget to contribute to it in the common fund?
Absolutely.
Mr. Bertoni.
So if I'm trying to read the back page and see if I can apply this newfound knowledge I've just gotten. Thank you all for your great questions, by the way. So the lakefront property, AKA the Strategic Opportunity Fund, is budgeted for $362,000, of which we spent 0. So would that mean that the balance is in fact $362,000?
That is the budgeted amount. So that probably means that the revenue came from other places. So that fund, the way that it's supported, its revenue is transfers from other funds.
Just on point, Mr. Hill, didn't Conservation Futures, there was the additional residual that we were able to get.
To 300, whatever thousand, because the value of the property went up. We're trying to figure out what we repeated. I had discussions with Lebo the other day about the commerce funds that are supposed to be coming to for the underpass. Follow up for that. We have not received those yet. Commerce is making us close out the prior one first, and they're behind on closing that out. So if the dollars have flowed, we'll have to back check that, but I don't know where they said the fees have been. So I hear long processes to get them shorter. So I don't know where they said, but we did end up with additional dollars because
They had a surplus.
they recognized, they had a surplus, they recognized the value had gone up, and they had wanted to get some at the beginning. So back around. So, and
Okay. Thank you for that. Let's move on to revenue by fund.
So revenue by fund, the capital improvement fund, actually, that one is we are waiting to get the parks levy, which comes in I would say like a 3/4 payment in June, and then you get a final payment in the last half of the in like the October, after people pay the property taxes, is how it's associated. And so we just received the email that they, on the dollar amount that the city will be receiving, so you'll be seeing that increase in June.
And just point of information, you were talking about the King County.
King County
Parks levy.
Parks
Thank
levy,
you, just-
King County, not, yes, King County.
Just in
One
case
that has
anybody
been
out there is
placed.
confused.
There
Yeah.
is no other parks levy here.
There is, yes. Thank you for that, for
Let's put a finer point on it.
making me back up and use all of my words. So sometimes thank you for doing that, because sometimes I do tend to speak in shorthand and not realize I'm even doing it. So to remind me to back up. So walking down to the sewer utility revenue, that one is showing a little bit on the lower side, and that's because at the beginning of June, we just sent out the additional invoices for the 2 months, so it's bi-monthly. So that one will kind of flow a little bit on the revenue side. The street fund, down a little bit, we need to do a little transfer from the general fund into that, and it's not one that the revenue is coming in on that fund. And so that's one we'll just keep an eye on.
And where does the revenue usually come from?
The revenue comes from right-of-way permits, and it also comes from the gas tax. It also, every fund has interest. And I think that's the main. No, TBD is not in the street fund, no.
No, that's the over.
The TBD fund the Transportation Benefit District Fund stands completely on its own. It is not within the street fund. And the funds that are out or receipted into that fund are then transferred into the Transportation Capital Fund 302 to support overlays, ADA ramps, and those kind of capital improvements.
Thank you.
And then walking down to the transportation capital, that one is basically fully grant, showing grant funded, and it's associated with the roundabout. And so that fund, the revenue on that fund will continue to be skewed until we start to see that come in. And that is based on, that's a reimbursement basis. So we will incur the expenditures, and then for the Transportation Improvement Board, right, TIB, Transportation Improvement Board, and WASDOT. Those are the two grant sources associated with.
This is a previous funding that we got, the 1.2 million. Yeah, but we have the TIB funding, and we have the WASDOT funding, so I think that.
That is correct. Thank you for the. Thank you. Are there? Should I just walk into capital
Questions on revenue by fund?
since we're kind of talking about capital?
Let's move right on.
It's walking right into it. So the roundabout, you'll see that's one of the only ones that actually has a little bit of the actual yellow bar right there. And then the Safe Streets Early Action, that one, there's a little bit of a yellow that you can see barely. Probably best to look at the numbers themselves.
Sort of a,
But there is the
Beige.
small amount.
you
Small
know,
amount.
I make one comment on the asphalt overlays and ADA ramps. I think that we've made kind of a policy decision to also provide walkways associated with those where we can. So we might want to just add walkway, associated walkways or something that's too long, but we might want to add some reference to that, because I think that that's a shift from our previous practice that we've kind of instituted, that we should signal in the heading, but it's going to be really long. Maybe it's overlay, walkway, and ramps.
Maybe we change the name and say, and I will have to run this by Phil, and just call it road improvements
That's possible.
or
Yeah.
Yeah, I need something like that.
Okay.
Mobility improvements or something.
mobility.
Yeah. Sure.
Improvements or infrastructure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, my point
Whatever
is,
you
come
want.
up with
Yeah.
an umbrella name.
Yeah,
Something
An umbrella name.
encapsulates.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
just takes the
appreciate
three.
that.
seems
Thank you.
reasonable.
I'm
Yeah.
not picky on what it is, but I just think it should be
Yeah.
better.
I will just make a note to rename sounds bad, but rename. Yeah. We'll work on that, and we'll have to get Director Perigo involved on that too, possibly.
You'll love it.
We'll just tell them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might work best too. So, then,
So, thank you. We talked about the past, and it would be really nice to see actually a capital improvement program dashboard that reflects planned budget, actuals, forecast for budget and schedule. So that you can see, are we on track? Where are the gaps? So it's not about just going through multiple tables to figure out that it is grant funded, therefore expenditures and so on and so on. It would be nice to see. And I'm used to a green, yellow, red, meaning you're on target for your cost and you're on target for your schedule.
So to your point, after our discussion on Tuesday, I have actually circled on that. I'm a bit for itself. It's awesome. If you could send me the categories you're interested in including, I've got the red, green, yellow working just fine. Trying
I
to
love waves.
simplify it, but I want to make sure I capture all the categories you're looking for.
I'll
So
do it
you
this
just shoot me a quick text or email.
Yeah, this weekend.
Make
Not
sure
this
we
weekend.
get that. No, that's.
Great.
We got plenty of time after Dallas.
I
No,
did,
that's fine. It just should be something. We want to make sure we build it and then we will circulate it before it becomes final. But yeah, it's.
I didn't wanna still thunder, because I know.
I have a question. I was just wondering on the word going 90, where that 490 sits. It's on the back page. There's an actual 0 time budget of 90. I know we're at like 90% of design, so I don't know if I should.
Oh, on the capital.
Is,
Yeah. Right, yeah,
actually,
because we're
no, I got,
basically ready.
I'm just trying to, I,
Oh, my attention, there's one yellow. One should be. I don't know if it's because it spans so many years, but I would think because it's a capital project and carry until it's done.
it should, and, I may have to send out a revise, because it looks like those columns through the legend may have gotten swapped. So on the budget, if you look on the back side, the actual and, well, actual and total, it doesn't really matter, but visually it's backwards. So what happens when you start to play with stuff? I didn't even catch that, but on the back side,
But for, especially for the capital, we're only looking at this year for this biennium
So by
version. So not taking into account what happened in prior biennium, which is where I think that the capital dashboard comes into play, because it's for the life of the project, not the specifically related to the budget, which is the focus of this particular line, which is where sometimes that's where we get a little bit
Yes.
lacking of continuity.
yes, correct.
Mr. Leo.
That's good question.
Speaking of our capital side, looking at our roundabout, our expenditures for this year at 48,000 seems low. Maybe it's just a building issue in terms of the progress that they should be making on the final design. Just an observation.
Mhm.
It just may be a billing. Curious about their progress on this.
I don't remember seeing invoices for other than small engineering services. So, yeah, well, it may be billing.
I've had design firms that didn't bill for 6 months, so
And then you get surprised.
no, you just keep calling them and say, do you want to get paid?
Fair enough.
I won't say that, but we have something that fails.
No,
They're
Would
artists,
you like?
they're not.
yeah,
Not only tested, doesn't.
Not in any way to disparage artists, but the design sometimes takes precedence. over the-
right. Director Bond, where are we here? Let's see.
Great question. Moving to the revenue by line item, so you are perfect where you have it located. These are our specific line items that we have chosen as a team to pull out and watch, and just so the business tax, that is coming in at 26%. Construction permits are at 18. The gas tax, motor vehicle excise tax, which is the MVET. That's the street fund, and that's at 19%. Mechanical and plumbing permits, you can see, is very strong at 40%. Passport revenues are right on target. Had some great help estimating that revenue clearly. And then the real estate excise tax, that's one we need to watch, which normally we're having the other conversation of how well it had been doing. But that is one we may need to watch and have a bigger conversation at the mid-buy about. Is it 2 years ago? We did, is it 2 years ago? I think so. At my first mid-buy, we actually construction permits, I think was the specific item, had been over budgeted, and we did reduce it. So that is something that we could look at doing, either leaving it to watch and not tying expenditures to it, or reducing the revenue. That's a holistic conversation, I think, that will be a mid-buy discussion, but just being aware that that goes into two funds, being the capital improvement fund and the transportation capital fund.
I thought because we knew it had been coming in high before, we did some conservative estimating when we were budgeting for this. And so, am I correct in that? And if so, it's still underperforming those more conservative estimates.
I think that's correct, and I think we're at, yeah, so it is underperforming by quite a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is troubling. But
It's
basically
surprising
calling
with all
it,
these $1.5 million houses around.
there's not that many of them. Change with the
I guess
answer.
that's the
But it's
answer.
their CASA for
Thank you very much, and I just am reflecting also on the real estate excise tax as well as the permits. And I won't be here next year, guys, but would you do it again? I suspect we will see a slowdown in both sales and construction for a few years to come. And so I would caution you when you create the next new budget to really be aware of that. I'm very curious, the fact that the mechanical plumbing permits are way up, and the construction permits are, sort of normal.
That's
little
because
bit
your
down.
hot water heater in your furnace is aging out.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing are minor remodels or repair,
Yeah,
replacements
Yeah,
mechanical
versus
fix.
major
Yeah.
construction or major remodels. So again, I think that this is, just to follow in the economy, and is something to be considered, just to watch and realize that things we've counted on in the past may not be the same in the future.
And I will state that in order to build this budget, I work very closely with our building. Finance doesn't create this budget. We do it together because they have the very intimate knowledge of and projection of what they think is going on and occurring, and I'm not sure if
I'm talking
Yeah.
about is those $2 to $3 million homes. They're building up, they're selling cash. Just right over, it's $1.2, $1.4 million homes. It's 7% interest rates. I think we didn't anticipate 7% interest rates.
No.
And so
Yeah,
that's where this
that's-
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. And I don't see
And
that
I see it
going
around
down.
me, the big homes are just going, and the other ones are sitting in the market for several months.
you're right.
Yeah.
I've heard rumor of, because the expensive ones are going for all cash, they're like 7-day closings.
Yeah, there's folks who have a very low interest rate, and even if they get a less expensive house, because the higher interest rates, it's a higher monthly. And they're being priced out of the monthly payment market, not the
Yeah,
dollar house
yeah.
market. And it's real
Yeah.
challenging out there for folks.
Yeah.
So they're holding, because that's all they can do.
Right. Yeah.
Not a lot of turnover.
Just doing a time check. We've got just a few minutes left. Director Vaughn.
and then I'll just say sales and use tax is coming in on target, and same with traffic safety cameras, so no concerns on those two fronts. Except for I will say, are there any questions?
I just want to know, we also estimated conservative on sales and use tax, so the fact that that's coming in on target is reassuring,
Mhm.
right? Because we had seen during the pandemic a bump up in that, and we estimated more conservatively, so I feel good about that one.
I think it is for shared sales tax.
And I'm just gonna, my perennial comment, which is that traffic safety camera revenue, in my mind, should never be counted on as a basic piece of our city revenue. The purpose of the traffic safety cameras is to get people to slow down. If they actually do it, the traffic safety camera revenue would go away. So you just can't count on this as a main revenue stream. It has to be thought of differently. And Autumn finally thought on that one.
Well, hope not a final thought. then it's,
Okay.
We've got a while to go.
I already told us, like I said again before we do.
So maybe there's an opportunity on a biannual basis to update us with the dashboard for your bond investment program. Maybe I'm.
Yeah, of course I brought. Your request has been granted.
Ah, there we go.
That's great.
You can
So,
talk to about a few minutes though.
well, it is very quick. Basically, I'm just going to. And it's out. So, walking into, the request was to just have a quick update on, the investments and how that panned out and looks. And so, to give you an idea of what took place, at first we did the first couple, and these were, I will state, purchased at different times, almost pretty urgently after we the investment policy or strategy was approved by the Budget and Finance Committee. We were able to purchase the first three. We did have to set up an additional account through a safekeeping account in order to secure the remainder of them. And that took a little longer than we would have liked, actually over a month. Yeah, it should not have taken that long, but it did, because everything that could have happened, it seemed like did. So, but I just want to, I want to state that because you are going to see differences in the interest rates. And immediately after our conversation, we did the $2 million blocks. And then after that is when I did the remainder, the longer term. And because of that account not being able to be set up as urgently as we had discussed or thought that it would take no more than 2 weeks, and it ended up taking quite a bit longer. Unfortunately, that variance did have some interest consequence, but this is how it all panned out. It is completed. And then at this point, when they start maturing, the one that's mid-September, then at that point, the goal is to go into the 2.5, 3.5, and possibly keep going out on the back end and fill in the half years so that something is maturing every 6 months. And that's the ultimate goal, as we discussed, but this is how it currently is invested.
Thank you for that update.
The future of this will show the variance in interest, so. Gained by not being.
Right,
Say the
right.
MBA.
With this-
And I think it would be nice to see the investor date, the date that the purchase was.
Whether it was a 6 month or a 9, like what was the, when did we invest in the maturities, you know, the length of the bond. Would be helpful for that.
I think the top one is 6, they've already 6 down the train.
I think the first time we could do it, but
Yeah.
then when they start rolling,
Yeah.
it's gonna get so complicated for us.
On that.
Correct.
Thank you, Director Vaughn, and everyone.
Thank you, well done.
Thank you
Yeah, very, very well done. Oh, it's afraid we have to move on to citizen comments. Matt, would you do the honors?
There's nobody online.
That's exciting.
I just want to hear you say the words.
No. Anybody wants to do something, please raise it. Want me to raise my hand?
Please raise your hand. No, thank you, everybody. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nancy.
I'm great now.